So now we go into the reproductive cycles. So in this one, you are in here presented with Estrous Cycle and the Menstrual Cycle. For Estrous Cycle, it states it is characterized by a period of heat or estrus where the female is sexually receptive to the male. So there is only a stage in the lifetime or stages in a lifetime of that specific female where it is receptive to male, and this occurs in mammals except to higher primates. So you will encounter more of your estrous cycle perhaps in your zoology courses like Zoo 102. But for now, we will concentrate on menstrual cycle, which is the absence of the period of heat. Okay, so for the following slides, we will be looking into the menstrual cycle or how it occurs among humans, specifically your female individual. So you have presented in here by your ovarian cycle. So as we mentioned a while ago, we have the primary follicle, and that primary follicle will mature in your ovary, and there is a resting time until ovulation occurs. Kapag nangyari na yung ovulation ninyo, it will proceed to secondary or to meiosis 2, resulting to now your secondary oocyte. Your secondary oocyte is now being released from the follicle. So, ito yung follicular cells niya. Okay? So, that is also present during meiosis 1 up to meiosis 2. Kapag meiosis 2 and you already have your secondary oocyte, and after ovulation, this egg is now being released from your ovary, leaving the follicle behind. So, meron ka ng empty follicle that is left behind the ovary. And we also call this empty follicle, we call this as your corpus luteum. The corpus luteum stays or disintegrates. It may also regress depending if your mature egg cell or your released secondary oocyte resulting to the ovum is fertilized in the fallopian tube or not. So later on, makikita ninyo in the following illustration kung ano yung epekto or ano yung function ni corpus luteum natin at kung magre-regress ba siya at kung kailan siya hindi magre-regress. So as we mentioned kanina, magre-regress yan or madi-disintegrate yan kapag hindi na-fertilize yung ating egg cell. But if this is fertilized, our corpus luteum will stay in the ovary. So in the case na hindi siya na-fertilize, ano yung mangyayari? Mare-release si egg cell through the process we call as your menstruation. So ang mangyayari ulit, babalik ulit tayo sa isang bagong primary follicle. So mag-start ulit yung cycle ng isang babae. So one of the, remember, di ba, 400 na lang yung naiiwan. Okay, so meron tayong 400 dito na mature follicle. So, kapag hindi na-fertilize ito, okay, magkakaroon yung isa sa mga naiwan na 400 primary follicle, mag-undergo ulit ng process na to. So, at first, mag-rest muna siya dito sa meiosis 1 na stage. And then, pag malapit na ulit yung ovulation, magkakaroon ulit tayo ng meiosis 2, repeating the cycle in the ovary. So, yan yung ovarian cycle. This image will just show you further details of the mature follicle. Okay, so ayan. So, yung si oocyte ninyo, ito yung marirelease. Tapos, ayan si inyong mature follicle. So, now let us further go into the details of your menstrual cycle. So now for details of your menstrual cycle as well as the different hormones that actually interplays with it, we have the following illustration as our guide. So the menstrual cycle is also highly influenced by the hormones that are actually being produced in one female's body. So it starts in the hypothalamus, wherein it releases what we call as your GnH or your gonadotrophin releasing hormone. So your gonadotrophin releasing hormones now is being released into the anterior pituitary. This anterior pituitary now triggers the release of two important hormones that plays in oogenesis or in the menstrual cycle or in gametogenesis, since it is both important for males and females. That are being released from the anterior pituitary are your FSH or your follicle stimulating hormone and your LH, which is your luteinizing hormone. Okay, so tingnan natin yung processes na nangyayari. You are already familiar in this image. Ito yung diniscuss natin na nangyayari sa ovary or in the ovarian cycle. Now, how is that related to the follicles that are being released? So, remember, during the primordial cell part, nung meron pa tayo nung mature na follicle, ito pa lang siya, that maturation of the follicle is actually triggered by the release of your FSH and your LH. Now, if you have FSH and LH that are actually high, that are saturated, it will now cause what we call as your ovulation. So, ma-release na yung ovulation natin kapag mataas na yung ating FSH at LH. And that ovulation would result to the release of your secondary oocyte or our ovum already, leaving the follicle empty, and we call that now your corpus luteum. So, ito na si corpus luteum ninyo or yung emptied na follicle ninyo. Kasi nga nakaalis na si si secondary oocyte or yung inyong ovum. By the time that the follicle has been emptied, nagkakaroon ka na ng reduction in the luteal hormone. Si corpus luteum also after ovulation. Okay, in the menstrual, you also have to understand that in the menstrual phase or in the menstrual cycle of the female, the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, yun yung maturation ng ating follicle dito sa part na to. So, the first half of the menstrual cycle before the ovulation, itong release ng ating ovum or ng secondary oocyte, we call that as your follicular phase or of the menstrual cycle. Now, the latter part after ovulation, so ito si ating ovulation dito. After ovulation, we call that as the luteal phase. Ano yung nangyayari ulit sa luteal phase? Ito yung nagkakaroon tayo ng empty na follicle. Tapos, nag-stay yung which we call as your corpus luteum. The corpus luteum can stay or it can disintegrate. If the corpus luteum is still present, it now produces what we call as progesterone and estrogen. These are important later on in the development of your blood vessels in the ovary lining or in the endometrium. Okay? So, punta naman din tayo dun sa translation ng FSH at LH natin into estrogen. So, as your FSH, your follicle stimulating hormone, and your LH, which is your luteinizing hormone, is produced during the follicular stage, tumataas din yung estrogen ninyo. Okay, so there is also your estrogen that is happening, resulting for blood levels of estrogen to increase, okay, gradually during the follicular stage. Kapag, so yan yung nangyayari during the follicular stage. Now, pagdating sa ovulation, medyo bababa yung level of estrogen ninyo, tapos tataas yung progesterone level. That is due to the progesterone or the release of, because your LH or your corpus luteum is actually responsible for triggering the release of your progesterone. Kaya tumataas yung progesterone dito sa luteal phase natin. Okay? Habang mataas yung progesterone at estrogen dito sa luteal phase, nagkakaroon ng build up ng blood vessels doon sa endometrial lining. Now, if the egg cell again that was released, itong ovum natin na na-release, kapag hindi na-fertilize yan, ang mangyayari, eventually, magdi-disintegrate yung corpus luteum. Kapag nag-disintegrate si corpus luteum ninyo, wala nang magti-trigger ng production ng progesterone at estrogen ninyo. Therefore, bababa na yan at this stage as your corpus luteum is regresses. So, kapag bumaba na yan, hindi na matutuloy yung build-up ng blood vessels ninyo in your endometrial lining or in your uterus lining. Kasi, remember, this build-up is very important to support the supposedly developing zygote. Pero kung hindi naman na-fertilize si inyong secondary oocyte or si ovum ninyo, at wala namang nangyari na implantation sa cell wall ng uterus ninyo, wala nang silbi yung blood vessel lining doon sa inyong uterus. So, ang nangyayari is shed off ulit yan yung lumalabas na menstruation at the end of the cycle of the female. Okay? So, after that, after ng menstruation niya, nawala na, so wala na rin yung follicle na nagha-house nung inyong oocyte dati, wala na rin yung oocyte. So, na-shed off na sila lahat in the form of your menstruation. Babalik ulit tayo sa isang bagong primordial cell or sa isang bagong follicle. So, babalik ulit yung cycle ng isang babae into the follicular stage. Okay? So, ganun yung nangyayari sa menstrual cycle. Yun din yung roles ng mga hormones as well as the estrogen that are present in the during the menstrual cycle. Okay, so just another image presentation of that one is presented in this image. Okay, so sa start ng cycle ng isang babae is this one. Okay, so you have in here the follicular space or say for instance mag-start tayo doon sa stage na nakaka-shed or nag-shed yung endometrial lining. At that time, okay, mag-release ulit or sa ovary ninyo mag-a-assign ulit siya or magde-decide siya aling follicle yung from the resting phase papasok sa second stage of meiosis. Pagpasok nun sa second stage of meiosis, mag-start tayo ng follicular phase. Magmamature na yan. Tapos, So, magde-decide yan kung alin yung mag-undergo ng meiosis. So, si meiosis, okay, mag-a-occur yan, magmamature si follicle ninyo, tapos, dito sa follicular stage, ma-release na yung secondary oocyte. Okay, after meiosis and everything. So, the follicular stage is usually the half of the menstrual cycle. So, that is between around 12 days around 12 days nung isang babae or menstrual phase nung isang babae. During the 14th day of the menstrual period, there is what we call as the ovulation period. Ano ulit nangyayari sa ovulation period? Nare-release yung inyong ovum or yung mature na secondary oocyte. Nare-release yan from the ovary, tapos iswisweep siya ulit ng fallopian tube natin, dadalhin niya sa fallopian tube or sa uterine tube. Sa ovary, maiiwan yung tinatawag natin na remains ng follicle that initially housed your secondary mature oocyte. We call that as your corpus luteum. The act of formation of the corpus luteum or the end-filled follicle, that is your luteal phase, and that comprises the second half of the menstrual cycle phase. Okay, so sa luteal phase na to ulit, nagkakaroon ka ng production ng progesterone and estrogen, which are very important in the build-up of your lining sa endometrium wall. This is to support the supposedly developing zygote. Pero again, ulitin natin, kapag wala namang zygote na napunta or wala namang na-implant na zygote dito, so dito may implant si zygote, okay? Kaya tumataas or kumakapal yung blood vessel lining mo dyan. That is in preparation for pregnancy to support the supposedly developing zygote. Pero yun nga, kung wala namang na-develop na zygote, magre-regress or magdi-disintegrate si corpus luteum mo, tapos dahil wala na si corpus luteum, wala nang magti-trigger ng production ng progesterone. Dahil wala nang nag-trigger ng production ng progesterone mo, therefore, hindi na makakapag-produce ng build-up ng inyong blood vessel lining in the endometrial lining. So, ang mangyayari, masashed na rin ito in the form of menstruation. Okay, until mag-start ulit tayo sa isang bagong follicle, balik ulit sa menstrual cycle. Okay, so that is what happens during the menstrual cycle of a female. Okay, so of course not just that one, because this involves a lot of hormones. It also has a lot of effects depende sa isang babae. So those hormone fluctuations could actually it looks simple as that, but these hormone fluctuations could also cause a lot of psychological and physical pains among your women. Okay, so yun. So, be more understanding of the females around you. Okay, so in this image, you also have another, ito naman yung mangyayari just in case na na-fertilize or nagkaroon ng implantation. Okay, so in the ovulation, again, you have a little bit rise in your progesterone. Dito rin sa stage na to, tumataas yung human chorionic gonadotropin, the HCG. Okay, so this HCG will be, this one is also increased in production. So during the pregnancy, here is the weeks in time. So during the pregnancy, tumataas pa yung progesterone na yan, tuloy-tuloy, as long as meron yung corpus luteum that would trigger the production of estrogen and progesterone. Okay? So this estrogen and progesterone are actually very important with the following function. So as shown in here, your estrogen is very important in supporting that supports the secretory endometrium. On the other hand, your progesterone also aids with that, and in addition, it inhibits the contractility of the uterine muscles and firms the cervix and inhibits dilation. Okay, so that those functions are very important para ma-prepare yung uterus ninyo for this developing embryo. Okay? And that also, so para siyang supplementary mechanism. So, as these are also present, it also releases your HCG. So, mapupunta yun sa brain ninyo. Kapag nandun yun sa brain ninyo, your brain ninyo, it will further trigger na wag ma-disintegrate si corpus luteum. Para si corpus luteum, it will still produce your progesterone and estrogen. Okay? Para ma-support niya si ating developing embryo, or it can trigger functions in the uterus or changes in the uterus. Okay, so that is your female reproductive cycle. Now, there are also hormonal controls of the testes. Okay, so you have in here stimuli from other brain areas in the brain, which includes your hypothalamus. So that hypothalamus again will have a releasing hormone triggering the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary will release your follicle stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone. So sa luteinizing hormone, this one would actually stimulate the Leydig cells to release testosterone, while your follicular stimulating cells would aid in spermatogenesis. So, ayan, dito siya. Pupunta siya sa inyong testes for spermatogenesis. If there are already high sperm count, okay, in your testes, if there are already a lot of sperm cells that have been produced in your testes, the Sertoli cells, remember si Sertoli cells, siya yung nourishing cells for your developing sperm cells. At kapag masyado ng maraming sperm cells, magsisend si Sertoli cells ng signal that will actually inhibit the secretion of your GnRH or your gonadotrophodin dito sa inyong hypothalamus para ma-stop yung production ng inyong FSH at ng inyong LH. Okay? So you have in there a negative feedback mechanism. Okay? So ganun naman yung role ng FSH at ng LH in your male or in the male gametogenesis or in the production of your gametes among males. Okay, so with all of those, I hope that you had a good review of the reproductive system in humans and that you have additional knowledge gained from this lecture. Okay, please prepare for a quiz if your instructor have required it so. Otherwise, please prepare for the next lecture. Thank you for listening.